background. So divorce inspired Jackie to learn about money when she realized that her husband had saved more than she did. And as a single mother and starting off with $20,000, she is now an early retired millionaire. Today, she is going to share her story and how she was able to pursue her dream of creating a financially literate society. And she is going to share her real numbers and exactly how she did it. As she goes through her presentation, we want this to be interactive, so please share your questions within the chat. And if she doesn't get to it within the presentation, she's going to get to the questions afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jackie.
Hey, Tanya, how are you? How's everybody? We got all these great people, New York, LA. I saw Columbus, Ohio. I'm in Dayton, Ohio. I saw, I thought I saw Macon, Georgia. I'm from Georgia and South Carolina. So nice to see you guys and so glad that you guys are here. So my name is Jackie Cummings-Koski. Cummings is my maiden name, so my brother will kill me if I don't include that. So thank you, Tanya. Koski is my married name, which is also my daughter's name, and that's kind of why I keep it. My daughter, she's 24 years old now, so you know she's up there. But I was so glad when Tanya reached out to me to talk about FIRE. So I've got like a little bit of an agenda. I've got a short presentation, and basically it includes all the questions that I get asked all the time. So I'm so thrilled to be amongst women. And yes, there are plenty of women in the FIRE community now. Certainly not enough, but I can speak to it. I think I was pursuing FIRE before it was even a thing. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. I'm gonna shoot through the presentation and then we'll just do some serious talking and things like that. And lastly, I'm very open with my numbers. So I talk about my pay or what I got paid when I was working. I talk about my net worth. I talk about all the money stuff because I got so sick of money being such a taboo topic. And I figured, okay, if we're gonna try to change this narrative and change the conversation around money, it's gotta start with me. So that's what I plan to do. So no questions off limits. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And you guys are hearing me okay?
Yep.
Thumbs up. Okay, great. All right. Okay, so what is FIRE? So I just titled the presentation this way. So the explanation of FIRE isn't going to take, 20 minutes to do. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of my story, some details, and I will answer the question, what is FIRE? But here's kind of like the agenda that we'll be doing today. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, for anybody that didn't know already. I'll talk about my journey just a little bit. I feel like I had a lot of obstacles, and I definitely don't fit the normal narrative of what you see highlighted in the FIRE community. So my journey was a little bit different, and I try to share it just to say, even if there's adversities, you grew up in poverty, and you've had all these obstacles throughout your life, it's still possible. Let's see, like I said, I'll show my real numbers. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what really happens after FIRE, because there seems to be all these questions about how can you retire early? You can't get health care, you can't do this, you can't do that. So I always answer all those questions in my presentation because I know that's the first thing that comes to mind. So we'll talk about, where's my paycheck after I retire early, accessing my funds before 59 and a half. And then the big one is health insurance. And then, of course, questions and answers. So again, as we go through this, you guys put your questions in the chat and I'll try to go through those, and we'll just have fun with it. I want to make sure your questions get answered. So throughout this presentation, and anytime I ever talk about FIRE, it kind of comes back to this grow the gap concept. And honestly, the concept is really not new. We've all heard the saying, live on less than you earn, make sure you don't overspend, the money that you're making. So this is just a variation of all those old sayings. So here's what it is. There are certain things that you want to decrease, and you can probably guess what those things are. So it's debt, right? A lot of us may have student loan debt. You might be getting a car, home, things like that. And then you want to reduce your taxes. This is the one that tends to be invisible. People forget about it, but you do have control over how much you pay in taxes. There's some smart things that you can do. And I was once, I never thought I was a tax person, but once I saw the money that I could save fairly easily, I was able to really watch my taxes or kind of structure things where I was paying less in taxes. And I'll get into that just a little bit. And then also your expenses. Now, there's some people that might be stronger at one of these three things than others. For instance, some people might be frugal, or they're a minimalist, or they're very good at cutting expenses. That's not me. I'm really not good at cutting expenses. I mean, I keep them down and I'm very smart with how I spend my money, but I'm better with the tax part. So you are kind of looking, you're tapping into your inner self to see where your greatest strength is. So those are the things that you want to decrease. So we're bringing that down. Now, what things do we want to do that is good? What things do we want to increase? So our earnings, and I think traditionally people would think of earnings as what you earn at your job, but these days that's not the case. Everybody has a side hustle. You know, you could get a promotion at work. You can go back and get maybe an additional degree. Maybe you can you know, go into management at work. So you can do it traditional way. You can side hustle. A lot of people do real estate. So there's so many ways to increase your earnings, not just at your traditional 9 to 5. And then the other things is your savings. So I like to talk a lot about savings rate. I really didn't even measure my savings rate until I came to learn about FIRE. And your savings rate doesn't have to be anything ungodly. Like I hear a lot of times 50%, 75%. I mean, not necessarily. It's going to go back to, okay, you know, how much are you earning? That might say you may not have to save quite as much, but you want to look at a percent of, you know, whatever your income is and how much of that are you saving. So as you increase that, again, you're moving that red triangle, you're moving that up and you're helping to increase the gap. And then investing. So many people are scared of investing. It's not that hard. The FIRE community mainly will focus on something as simple as an index fund. And an index fund is simply a basket of stocks that follows an index, typically a stock market index, like the S&P 500. That's the 500 largest companies in the US. Those are your Google, your McDonald's, your Apple, all of those. So you're spreading out your risk. So the investing part doesn't have to be some highly complicated thing where you're looking at PE ratios or you're buying only individual stocks, or so that part I think have been totally overcomplicated by the industry. So don't let that scare you. So this is the overarching what FIRE is turning retirement on its head. And you don't even have to retire, but the idea is to put yourself in the position of, if you wanted to, you could retire. As far as the number, as far as your FIRE number, if you hear about that, that is basically 25 times your expenses, not your income, but your expenses, because you could be making $80,000 a year, but your expenses is only 40,000. So you're looking at that 40,000 number, your expenses. You multiply that times 25, and that's generally going to be your number. Some people are more comfortable with a lot more. Some people may be a little bit less because they might say, you know what, I'm going to be doing some consulting, so I'm going to have some income or extra income, or I've got real estate. So that's flexible, but if you wanted some kind of down and dirty formula that's used, it's 25 times your expenses. And then on the back end, once you get that and you're ready to either retire, take it easy, work on your passion projects, and not worry about getting a paycheck from a job, then you would be able to, there's a study called the Trinity study. All that basically said is called the 4% rule by most people, but it just says that if you only take off 4% of your nest egg, it should last you for 30 years or more, and potentially the rest of your life, depending on, you know, what kind of growth you're getting. So 25 times your expenses, then on the back end, taking off 4%. And it's been highly debated if 4% is too much. So you might want to do 3%. You know, for me, I needed more comfort than that. So I did, you know, do a little bit more than that. And when I go through my numbers, I'll just show you where I ended up at. But it was always important to me to have some type of rule of thumb and some starting point to figure out where I am. So those are some initial numbers for you if you want to start to look at your own. Okay, so for me, this is kind of me. I retired in 2009. I'm fired 2009. Now I have one daughter, and as I mentioned, she's 24. So this is back in 1996 when she was like, I think she was like 2 years old. So that's her, and that's me way, way back in the day. But here's just a little bit about me. I retired at 49. I worked for like a sales and a data analytics company here in Ohio. I'm obviously African American. And I'm a single mom. I'll talk a little bit more about when I got divorced and how that really sort of was my wake up call as far as getting my finances together. And I have one adult daughter, and I make less than 6 figures. So I don't live in LA or San Francisco or New York. So I don't make the big bucks like that, but my cost of living is lower. My average salary was probably about $80,000. Like I took the last 10 years that I worked and I just averaged that out. It was about 80,000. So let's take a look at my salary and expenses. So my gross income from my job was on average over the last 10 years, about 80,000. I worked in sales, so it would fluctuate. So like if I had a really good year, I'd be like maybe at 90 or 95. If I had not so good year, it would be more like 65 or 70. In Ohio, that's pretty good, but I know it's probably peanuts in California and New York, but that's where I was. I had a little bit of other income, like, I had the book, I get a few bucks from that. And I do a lot of financial literacy things, speaking and stuff like that. And sometimes I will get, paid for some of those. So that was only about 2,000. So a very small amount, but again, that's increasing my income, right? Then I had about $70,000 in debt. I think it's down to about 60,000, but that debt is just my mortgage. And I consciously decided to not pay off my mortgage before I retired because the interest rate is so low. So it didn't make any sense. And, again, here's a real big disparity based on, the cost of living for the area that you're in. My home is a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, big backyard. I'm looking at it right now, about $180,000. And so my mortgage on it, I think I got about $60,000 left. And my mortgage payment, including taxes, insurance, principal, and interest, is like $900, something like that. So, and again, that's in Ohio. My annual expense is about $45,000. And that's kind of inflated. It's probably more like 40. So it depends on year to year. Being a homeowner, there's always something that comes up, but it doesn't come up every year, those types of variables. And again, my FI number was 25 times my expenses. I think I was 46 when I hit that number. But like I said, I didn't come up from a family of entrepreneurs. I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids. And, we basically lived in poverty. I grew up in poverty. So I was never taught entrepreneurship, and I was very afraid to leave a safe, good job is what my family would call it. So I needed a little bit more of a cushion, because if everything went wrong and I made no money, not one penny, I wanted to make sure I wouldn't be put in the poorhouse and that I was still going to be okay. So I decided to get to 30 times my expenses. So when I was talking about, just this is a rule of thumb, for me, 25 times was just not enough to make me sleep at night. 30 times was a little bit better. So, okay. Now for my savings and investing, I had about a 40% savings rate. So that's not huge. And I worked up to that. So I wasn't always making, I wasn't always saving 40%, but that's about where I was at, I would say, over the last 10 years. And then these are the things when I was talking about taxes before. So I maxed out my 401k. That was a huge thing in lowering my taxes, because I did a traditional 401k, and a traditional 401k lowers your taxable income. So I was paying less in taxes and more in my pocket, more in my 401k. Then I got a company match. My company had an awesome match. I maxed out my Roth. I like the idea of having accounts with different tax treatment. So my 401k was mostly traditional, meaning I got a tax break up front. The Roth IRA I didn't get a tax break up front, but when I take that money out, I don't have to pay taxes on it. It grows completely tax-free, and I never have to worry about it. So I like the idea of being able to pull from different pots. So when people ask, what's better, traditional or Roth? I kind of like a mix of both because it gives you flexibility when you're ready to use it. And then my health savings account, that's been a big deal for me. For some reason, when my employer first started offering them, probably right around 2008, I started immediately maxing it out, and I was able to max out the family because it was me and my daughter. So that was also pre-tax. So that was reducing my taxable income. So I was seeing how little, by the time I did my TurboTax every year, I was surprised to see how little I was paying in taxes. And finally the wheels were turning that, wow, I'm paying so little in taxes because I'm making these contributions to these tax or pre-tax accounts. And then lastly, in taxable savings, I did about $2,000. Okay, and here's what my spending kind of looked like. I wasn't a huge budgeter, to be honest, but I wanted to put some numbers to it for you guys. Again, I am in like nowhere, Ohio, so it was pretty cheap. So, but these are kind of what my numbers are like. That's my housing, you know, utilities, food, and, you know, I'm sure, you know, you guys have gone through, you know, budgeting and you kind of understand that concept. Here's what mine look like. And to be honest, the way that I really did it is I just did it backwards, right? I was a good saver and I was a good investor. So what I did, I subtracted what I was saving, what I was investing, and taxes, and that's how I ended up figuring out how much I was spending. So there we go. So this is how I did it backwards. I did my savings, I did my taxes, and that's how I came up with what, you know, how much I was spending every year. All right. So you know what? Let me see if I can answer any questions. I would love to do that. Let's see here. 5 times 25. See if there's anything cool in here. I was wanting to say. Oh, so annual. Okay, so 25 times your expenses would be annual. So I came up with my annual number. My number was anywhere between like 40,000 and 45,000. Let's see. Would love to know the tax stuff when entrepreneur, put in Roth or pay down student loan. So she's asking, do I put my money in a Roth IRA or do I pay down student loans? I say do both. And right now, if you guys don't know, with the CARES Act that just passed, student loans are 0% and no payments until the end of the year. So this year in particular, I would definitely do Roth. And I would say do both. Just decide how much you want to put to each, because I don't like the idea of completely deferring your investing, because that compound growth is so powerful that I don't like to, even if you only got $5 or maybe a couple hundred that you put in for the year, get it started. So I would say try to do both. What if your HSA is for the healthcare you don't like? Yeah, for the health savings account, you do have to be on a high deductible health plan, which I was on, and the premiums were cheap. I got to save in a health savings account, and I invested in that health savings account, and me and my daughter, we were very low consumers of healthcare. So we really, you know, it just worked for us. So if you have a sucky plan and the math doesn't work, then there's some situations where you might be better off with, you know, a traditional plan. But if you are offered a health savings account or a high deductible plan with a health savings account, it is always worth running the numbers and taking a look at that. So let's go back here. Okay, I got to go back to the share screen here. Shoot, hang on. Okay, got it. All right, let's go back to screen share. Okay, now you guys want to see my paycheck? I'll show you kind of what those look like. All right. So this was 2019. So this was the last year that I was working. And my take-home pay, I took home about 36%. So I was saving more than I was taking home. The next section, the biggest part here, is my pre-tax deductions. That's how, and I'll highlight those in just a minute. But the very last part, can you guess what the last section is of my paycheck? So no pay statement is complete without taxes. So normally I was paying less than 15% in taxes, but I think the way my paychecks were set up, it would take out roughly 15%. And then every time I did my taxes each year, I would end up getting a refund. And I tried to finagle that so many times because I would rather have it throughout the year, but it never worked out that way. And probably because the average person doesn't, take out all these deductions. So here's what my pre-tax deductions look like. And if you want to imagine your own paycheck and what it's looking like, are you is it sliced up the way you want it to? So mine was, again, it was medical and dental insurance. Dental insurance was almost nothing for me and my daughter. It was, $50 something every 2 weeks. And this is a bi-weekly paycheck. Then my health savings account, that was about $270. And this is every pay period. And then the big one was my 401k. So we'll look at my net worth, but you'll see where, every 2 weeks I'm contributing my 401k, how it flows through into my final net worth. So this is what my paychecks look like. Okay, so here's the net worth. And as you see, the biggest part was, the 401k, just from, that just being the biggest line item of my deductions. And it was just, I love the idea of automation. We consider it a very simple thing, but if I had to think about the things that helped me get to FIRE, I would say automation and having my 401k contributions come directly from my paycheck and into my 401k, and it got automatically invested. It's like, there's nothing much easier than that. With my Roth, I had to set that up by myself. I have to make sure I make the contributions every month. So it wasn't really automated. I mean, I probably could automate it, but automation to me is like a big deal because it makes it easy to save and invest. The next biggest one is a rollover IRA. So this IRA is kind of important to me because one of my biggest wake-up calls financially was when I got divorced. So I'd been married for about 11 years, and my daughter was 9 years old at the time. And when you get divorced, especially if you've been married for at least 10 years, they look at all the assets. And really the biggest asset of value was our 401ks. The house, there was hardly no equity in that. We owed a little bit on the cars. I had a little bit of student loans. So the only thing worth looking at was the 401ks, right? So we were making roughly the same. I think the last few years, though, he was making a little bit more than me. So I understand partly maybe he was able to put in a little bit more, but we managed all of our finances together. So everything went in one pot and the bills got paid. So by the time we looked at our 401ks, I had $20,000. At this point, I'm 35 years old, right? 35, I've got $20,000 in my 401k. I was feeling pretty good, right? I mean, I thought that was great. But when I looked at my husband's 401k, and this is the first time I'd ever looked at it, he had $120,000 in his 401k. So he had $100,000 more than me. And that was the one thing that just, it gave me a heart palpitations because I'm like, thinking, how could I ever not be aware of this and there be such a large disparity? Like, did he invest in different things? Did he just save more? Did he get a better match? And mostly it came down to he worked for a major bank, and we got divorced in 2003, 2004. And he had that bank's stock in his 401k, and it was doing really, really good until 2008, right? So so there was a number of little things. There was not one big thing, but when you get divorced, they do a process called Quadro, and basically they take all of your, they take the 401k money and they split it in half. So by the time we got divorced, that gave me $60,000, and that was my half. And I held on to that through his company for a little while, and then I rolled it over to this traditional IRA that you're seeing right now. That account started out at $60,000, right? Well, I just checked it today, and the balance on that is $243,000. So that just gave me a sense of pride because I had vowed to never be that financially vulnerable ever again. And I wanted to make sure I learned about investing. I wanted to make sure I learned about savings. and to be a good steward of my money. So that started my wheels to turn, and you know, it definitely worked out. So this account, I never put a penny in. After that 60,000, I never took a penny out, and it's grown from 60,000 to $243,000. So I'm pretty proud of that. The next part is my health savings account. Again, that is kind of supercharged. You know, the balance on that one, I think, is like $140,000. And all I did was max it out every year. I invested it. Since me and my daughter were very low consumers of healthcare, I was always able to pay out of pocket. So I've held on to receipts, because with the health savings account, there's no time limit where you can pay yourself back. So I've just digitally held onto these receipts, just like in a folder in my email. And so, but keeping it invested obviously helps it to grow, and grow. So I'm thinking, you know, I'm young and healthy now, most of you guys are, but you know, by the time you start hitting 50, 60, whatever, more than likely your health, you will start to be a higher consumer of healthcare. So it gives me a little peace of mind to know I have that specifically set aside for my healthcare needs as I get older, and where I might need it more likely than I do now. And then there's my home equity. These other ones are pretty small, but there's my Roth IRA. I have a teeny tiny company pension. I mean, that's like $50,000. When I started working for the company, I didn't even realize they were putting money in this pension, and then they stopped it like 10 years ago. But you know, it's there. Every little bit counts. And then I'm in a stock investment club, so that represents about 3%. And I have a car. I put my car in my net worth. I just like to see everything. It is paid in full, but that does represent about 2%. So this is what my net worth looks like. And again, you know, I retired at 49. So, you know, I'm probably far beyond where you guys are at, but it started with it started with that $20,000. So, and I was 35 when all that was going on. I was getting divorced. I was becoming a single mom. I only had $20,000 in my 401k to this. So this is the timeline that makes a little bit more sense. So unfortunately, so if you guys want to do a powerful exercise, do your net worth. So I didn't start using a net worth statement, and this is just Excel. So Personal Capital wasn't around, which is a great net worth tracker. I think there's a few more out there, but this is just Excel, right? And I wish I would have started tracking my net worth when I was married, or maybe right when I got divorced. I got divorced in 2003, 2004. So it took me almost 10 years to start tracking my my net worth. But that was such a powerful exercise, frankly, the most powerful exercise I've ever done with my finances, because it let me know where I was. And that also helps you grow that gap. You know, if you see what the negative things are that's bringing your net worth down, and what the positive things are that can help you increase it. So basically, you know, from 2013, when I sat down to do it, I was glad that one was in the green. But when you do yours, you may not even be in the green. But when you start seeing the needle move, it really makes a difference. So I started out with like around $500,000. And that was when I didn't even know what I was doing. Like I was maxing out my 401k, and I was maxing out my health savings account and things like that. But I wasn't really keeping track at how it was accumulating. So not even knowing what I was doing, it got me to almost $500,000 in, you know, less than 10 years. So you guys could probably start doing the same thing. And who knows, maybe I would have retired even earlier if I simply would have started my net worth to try to be more methodical about it and see where I was at. So like I said, I hit my FI number here in 2017. And then in 2019, that's when I retired early. And I retired with about 1.3 million. And, you know, as crazy as this year has been with the coronavirus and the market crash back in March, my net worth has actually increased, even though I haven't made any new contributions, and I've been living off of my investment. So that's pretty nice. I know it won't be that way every year, but this year so far has been okay. Okay, so let me see if we can answer a few more questions. Let's see.
I think a few people were asking about reviewing the 4% recommendation one more time.
Okay, yeah, so the 4%, and again, I'm going to call that a rule of thumb, the 4% rule of thumb. So there was a Trinity study that was done where they ran all these different scenarios as far as what would be a safe withdrawal rate. So let's say for me, I have 1.3 million, or let's do it round number. So let's say I have $1 million, and that was my FI number. That was 25 times my expenses, right? So 4%, if that the 4% rule means that I can remove 4% of my investments to live on, and it should last me 30 plus years. So $1 million, 4% of $1 million is $40,000 a year. So that's about what my expenses are. So I will take out $40,000 every year, but remember that nest egg is still growing. So it might be growing, let's say at 8%. So if it's growing at 8% and I'm only taking off 4%, it's still experiencing that growth. Now, some people, again, are not that comfortable and they think that's too much and they want it to last longer. You know, if you retire early, arguably, you may want it, you may need it to last longer than 30 years. So maybe you drop that to 3.5 or 3 or 2. And so there's a lot of financial calculators out there. If you Google like 4% rule or early retirement calculator, FIRE calculator, things like that, you'll be able to plug in your numbers and just different scenarios so you can kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, this is what it means to me. So that's what that 4% rule is. So for me, I don't plan on really, some people when they retire early, they actually maybe do a blog or they do other projects that makes them money. So that actually lightens the load even more. But for me, I ran my numbers assuming $0 and all of my money would come off my investments. Now, more than likely I will, have some income from the projects that I do, but I just want to make sure that if I do nothing or have no income, I always be doing something, but if I have no income, I would still be okay. That was my main thing. I just don't want to be put in the poorhouse if something doesn't work out. So any other 4% rule questions? I hope I explained that okay.
Yeah, I think one other question, like a follow-up to that, is if your nest egg is always growing, how do you safeguard against economic or global
downturns?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can tell you what I did because I got that question like a million times when the market dropped back in March. So you do have to look at when you will need that money. I mean, typically, if you need the money within 5 years, it probably should not be invested in the market. Now, retiring early, I was always a believer. I had most of my money just in straight up stock index fund. So like the S&P 500, or I would have like a total stock market fund. The FIRE community talks a lot about VTSAX. That's just a ticker symbol for the Vanguard total stock market fund. The reason why they always reference that one, and all these providers have a similar one, it's just a very low fee, and it covers the entire stock market. I think there's a total of 3,000 companies that trade in the US. So that's really good diversification. Some people might say throw in some international or throw in some bonds or something like that. For me, I never did like bonds. It's just like, straight up stock market. And as young as you guys, most of you guys are, you're probably good with just getting a straight up index fund of stocks. Now, to guard against downturns, that's where your bonds come in. And bonds they're not going to grow as fast as the stock, as far as the stock market, but they're a little bit more safe. So here's for instance. So if you have bonds, they're going to return anywhere from 2 to 3% per year. Compare that to 8 to 12% being in the stock market. But as you know, the stock market can go like this, right? It's very volatile. Bonds are like the slow little line, and it's not going to move that much. And that's why it's considered sort of your safety net. So in preparation for early retirement, I did put a little bit in bonds. I don't know, maybe 20%. But here's a really important thing that I did, because the stock market in general corrects itself or has a downturn about every 8 to 10 years. Our last big downturn was in 2008. And I was retiring in 2019, and we still hadn't had that downturn. So I was pretty confident that the market was way overdue for a pullback. So one of the things that I did, in addition to the bonds, I put 3 years worth of living expenses in cash. So no matter what happened with the stock market, I knew I was good for those 3 years. And as time goes on, I'm going to have to sort of make sure that I've always got 2 to 3 years. For me, I wanted to always have a portion of what I needed to live on out of the market. So when the market dropped, it was like, I think the 3rd week of March, when it did that severe drop, it had no impact on the money that I set aside to live on. So you do have to be defensive in that way. You just need to look at your time horizon. Like if you're, let's say you're 30 right now, and let's say you don't plan to retire till you're 50. So you don't have to worry so much about having bonds and things like that. But if you're 30 and you want to retire at 35, that's a different story, right? So that was a good question. Good question.
And
all right, so
you keep it in cash. Do you put it in a high interest savings account?
Okay, so the way that I did mine, I kept mine inside of the retirement. Well, so part of what I will live off of, and we'll cover this a little bit more further on into the presentation, but like Roth contributions, you can take out tax and penalty free anytime for anything, right? So that was a portion of what I was going to take out. I just would leave it in the account, my Roth IRA, but have it in cash. So if I wanted to get it, I could. So I didn't even want to move it out because, for instance, let's say if I got a decent gig where I got $20,000, then I might not need to live on, I might not need to take it out. So once you take it out, that's it. Also, my investment club, that was a regular taxable account, no tax advantages or anything. And I started taking out a little bit of that. And yes, I would just put it in the high yield saving, or I would always look for like a savings account that has a bonus or something like that. Because I figured, okay, if I'm going to put this money in a savings account already, then who's got the bonus? Sometimes there's $100, $150, maybe even $200 bonus when you put, money into a savings account. I don't see those around that much lately, but it happens. Like Ally, I think, always has a promotion and things like that. And when I rolled over my 401k, or I've started doing it, there's bonuses to move to a broker as well. So I always keep that in mind, that these financial institutions, they want my business, they want my money, and a lot of times they will offer incentives. You just have to go Googling. So, okay, so let's get back to the presentation here. Let me X out of this. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Okay, you guys seeing that okay? So how did I get here? And like I said, I kind of had a bumpy road. I talked about a lot of it already, but I had a lot of failures and mistakes and setbacks, and you name it, I probably had it. I didn't have any great advantages when I was young. Like I said, I grew up in poverty, rural poverty. So it was in South Carolina. We lived in a little town called Aiken, South Carolina, that was right on the border of Augusta, Georgia. We lived down a dirt road, and I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids, and he only had a 6th grade education. So I remember he worked at this like factory. And so we barely made ends meet. So I knew what poverty was like. And the main thing that I remembered growing up is that I didn't want to live like this when I got older. So that was the beginning of my origins. And yeah, like I said, before I even knew what I was doing, and you saw that net worth chart, even though it started in 2013, that was like almost 10 years post-divorce. And so during those first 10 years or so, I was just kind of flailing around. I knew it was good to save. I knew it was good to invest, but I had no method to what I was doing. But even doing something, even though I didn't know exactly what I was doing, I was in the right direction. So I was happy about that. So here's just this grow the gap. And again, it's such an important concept. It probably warrants showing it again. So you're trying to decrease your debt, your taxes, and your expenses, and increase your earnings, your savings, and your investing. And hopefully I've kind of painted somewhat of a picture on what I'd been doing to grow my gap as time went on. Okay, let's look at the timeline, because a lot of people will say, You know, they'll be like 35 and they'll be like, I think it's too late for me to pursue FIRE. And to be honest, I started hearing about FIRE about, I would say, like when my daughter graduated from high school. So that was like 2013 when I started that net worth chart. So the pioneers of FIRE were mainly white, male, young engineers. A lot of them didn't have kids. And that has been the face of FIRE for a very long time. There was hardly any women, and there was definitely no people of color, no African Americans. But over the last 5 years, I have seen that shift a bit. Unfortunately, still a lot of the media and a lot of the headlines that you see, that's sort of the avatar. And frankly, I learned a lot from those guys. You know, a lot of them are engineers or tech people. And you know, I was always a podcast listener. So that's who I listened to. And I learned a ton from them. So I'm not saying that, you know, it's a bad thing that, you know, they were the pioneers, but it would just be great to see more diversity. And part of what I'm trying to do is reach out to those people that, you know, are more like me, where, you know, I didn't have an advantage of a 2-parent household. I didn't have the advantage of my parents paying my way through school, or my parents helping me with my first car, my first house, or any of that. You know, my dad passed away when I was 18, so I was on my own at 18. And most of the voices that I was hearing, my story was so different. So I had to spend a lot of time figuring out how can I take what they're showing me and telling me and apply it to me. And I'm hoping that that's what you'll do today. So we all don't have the same journey, but you can say, okay, I think I can do it this way. And how does it work for you? So keep that in mind. But here's what my timeline kind of looked like, so you can kind of get a sense of that. Like I said, I grew up in poverty, you know, up until about 17. And one of the, I guess, most actionable things that I did to sort of climb the economic ladder was to go to school. I knew if I got a college degree, I would more than likely get a better job, paying more money. So at that time, like I said, nobody was paying my way through school. So I had to work full time, sometimes 2 jobs, and I took a full load at school. I took like 3 to 4 classes like everybody else, but it was impossible to keep up. So, you know, my grades kind of suffered. I mean, I graduated, but definitely my grades were nothing to brag about. But I got through school, you know. And then, you know, between 23 and 25, that's when I met my husband. I got married. We had a daughter, and it's like, yay, everything's beautiful. Everything's coming up roses. And then, you know, after being married about 10 years, I got divorced and I became a single mom. So frankly, right at 35, 36, you know, I have $20,000, realizing my husband had way more money than me, feeling pretty dumb, to be honest, and trying to figure my life out. And the reason why it's 2 years, 36 to 37, is because, you know, getting divorced is a very emotional time. And you start to think about yourself, you know, it can shoot your confidence and make you think about, you know, where did I go wrong and how do I move on? You know, so I did 2 years probably of not knowing what to do. And one of the first things that I did after that to kind of, you know, open up my mind and my world open up myself to my new world, I joined in a stock investment club because I kept thinking about, well, what do I like to do? What do I want to do? Because my daughter's dad got her every other weekend. So every other weekend, you know, I used to spend with my family. So what do I do now? So I joined this investment club. I learned about investing, and that helped me tremendously. So that was like the first shift. So I'm 38 and I'm just waking up. So if you're younger than that, you got way more time. I probably, if I could do anything different prior to 38, I would say that I wish I would have saved a little bit more, done a net worth statement, and been more conscientious about my picture overall. But, you know, you work with what you got, right? Okay, and finally, this next stage I kind of call money moves, because I finally, you know, woke up and I started, you know, putting a plan to everything. So I started maxing out my 401k, IRA, health savings account. You know, I reached my FI number, 25 times the expenses. And I realized I could retire now, but I wasn't quite ready. I like my job. I like my company. I was there for 20 years. I had a great boss at this point. So I wasn't miserable at my job. It wasn't, you know, emotionally taxing or anything. I mean, it was tough because it was sales, but I wasn't trying to run away from that. I knew that I had to run towards something, not run away from something. So I waited. I didn't just wait. Okay. So I was designing what my life would look after I retired early. And for me, I did have to retire. So in your case, you might say, I just want to shift, you know, but my job in sales for data analytics company had nothing to do with me trying to create a financially literate society. So the two didn't mesh. So I had to have a hard stop and I had to, you know, make the shift. So I decided to work 2 more years and I used that time to design my life after I retired early, you know, getting the finances lined up, what I wanted to do and things like that. So I handed in my fire letter. You know, I had the big retirement party and it was great that my boss threw me a retirement party because nobody thought I was really retiring. I'm like, I am retiring. They're like, no, you're going to work somewhere else. I'm like, no, I'm not. So then I retired early. Now before I retired early, you know, of course I had to hand in just the obligatory letter of resignation. And that was kind of hard. It was bittersweet. But do you guys want to see the letter? So I'm going to show the letter. Not going to read all the details, but this was the gist of the letter. So I basically said, I know my 40s is a little early to retire, and some may even say I'm giving away the golden ticket. If my dad were alive, he would definitely say, you're crazy, you're giving away the golden ticket. You have a good job, you got good benefits. So, and then I said, I've certainly spent many months, maybe even years, imagining such a divergence from the norm, and ultimately I came to this conclusion. I could either follow a traditional path or blaze my own, and I chose the latter. So that was my fire letter, and my boss, he gave me a hug. It was remarkable how he made me feel making that transition. You know, I didn't know if he was going to try to make me feel guilty or if he was going to try to get me to stay. I knew him well enough where I think he kind of knew that the financial literacy part of my life was really important and getting bigger and bigger. So it makes a difference with your boss too. And he actually made it very bearable, and probably why I was willing to stay those 2 additional years. So this is just something, you guys have seen versions of this, but I love to show people how compound growth is so magical. So my example is if you save and invest $50 a week and you get about a 9% return just in a stock market index fund like we talked about, if you did that for 40 years, you would have $1 million. And for most of us, that is definitely doable. Now, this is something that I give everyone that graduates in my family. I give them a $50 bill and I show them the magic of compound growth. And it's really the gift that keeps on giving because I'm teaching them something in the process. And on the back of that little card, I have an amortization schedule for 40 years and how much they will have each year. So since I am part of the FIRE community, I believe in optimizing everything. So imagine if you could cut that time in half. So 20 years instead of 40, right? So here's what that looks like. And you guys, it's probably doable for most people, especially if you can get the student loans paid off. This is just to show you that it doesn't have to take 40 years, right? FIRE is all about retiring early, or at least putting yourself in the position to retire early or do whatever you want. So here's how the numbers line up. Obviously, you're going to have to save more than $50 a week, right? It ended up being $350 a week, but the max that you can put in your 401k this year is $19,500. So to get to $1 million in 20 years, if you only invested $18,000, so less than the 401k match, if you did that and you still got the 9% growth, you could get there in 20 years, really just by maxing out your 401k. And a lot of us, our employers match. So if they match, that's less money that you have to bring to the table, or less that you have to invest. So interesting to see how quick and easy you could cut that time in half if you wanted to. So I love compound growth. And I just want to show those side by side. Can you tell I love compound growth? So $350 a week if you want to get there in 20 years, half the time. So we talk a lot about the best path. For me, I never did real estate or anything like that. However, think about, your path and what makes sense for you. What wakes you up, what really lights you up. I have found that there's 3 ways that people can get to wealth. Okay, you guys probably know, right? Stock market, real estate, and entrepreneurship. And these were just kind of my superpowers here. So I like to show those. Think about your superpowers. Imagine that. I already talked about diversity, but the FIRE community has come a long way. And just the after firing part, and we kind of talked about this 4% rule. That's what this is. I leave these to the end because inevitably they come up during the conversation. So we kind of talked about this. And after firing, like, how do I get to my investments and my retirement after that? Here are so many ways. I was just encouraged that there were so many ways. These things are all well written about, but probably the 2 most people talk about is your Roth contributions you can take out at any time. Health savings account you can take out at any time. So keep those in mind, and again, apply it to yourself. And then the health insurance part, I want to just show you that is fixable too. That's figure outable. These are all the different ways. Personally, again, it becomes a personal thing. I ended up going with the Affordable Care Act. That was the thing for me. So just to round it out, for me, my why for retiring, my reason for retiring early is so that I could help create a financially literate society. So hopefully I'm doing that with you guys and with everyone I come in contact from here on out. So that kind of does it. So let's look at some questions. Let's see here. Let me go into the chat. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see. I almost don't know. Tanya, do you have anything in particular that keeps coming up, or I can hit the hot ones first if a lot of people kept asking?
I think that there were a few questions around how do you think about your daughter's education as you think about your own retirement plan?
Okay, thank you for that. My daughter's education was, this is really old fashioned, but me and my husband, when we were married, we had savings bonds, and that equaled about $20,000 for her, her education. Now she has graduated from college now. Most of that $20,000 was covered by the savings bonds, but I did have a 529 for her and ended up not even using it. I think it was like $30,000. And I had that invested, but she didn't need to use that. So I ended up giving, I have a whole bunch of nieces. So 3 of my nieces were in college and doing great. So I gave each of them $3,000, 2-step process, but I was able to open up an account for them, give them $3,000. Plus I'm going back to get my master's, and I'm using the 529 money that way. So the short answer is she went to a state university that didn't really cost that much. And she went there for 1 year. She came back home and decided to go to a community college, and she's a graphics designer. And one of the community college where I live is one of the best in the country. And she's been working at the company she's at now for well over 3 years. She had 2 internships. So she's doing great and didn't need the college money. So we got lucky.
Yeah. And there was another question that kept coming up was about the stock performance, especially during COVID and these uncertain times.
Okay, so the best thing to do if you're in accumulation mode, that means you are building up your next nest egg. The best thing to do is continue your dollar cost averaging. That means, like, for your 401k, if you have a contribution set up and it's going in there every week, continue doing that, because if you don't need it for long term, if the market's down, then you're getting, into the market at a lower amount. So stay the course. It is easy to get scared, especially if you watch the stock market. But if you're in accumulation mode, stay the course because you got plenty of time for that to grow. And if you are in decumulation mode or you're ready to draw off some of that money like me, I just put a portion of it, you know, in safe things like bonds or the 3 years worth of expenses completely in cash. So I won't say I wasn't worried about the stock market and I wasn't worried about COVID. There's so many aspects of that that certainly make me nervous. But because I set it up knowing that I was ready to take my money out, I didn't have to worry about the whims of the market. So if you have more than 5 years, definitely stay the course, continue making your biweekly or monthly contributions, and you really don't need to do anything different unless you have a little extra money and you want to increase your contributions.
Awesome. Well, I know that there's about a minute left and some people have to run, but I just wanted to take a little bit of time to say thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story. I think that you're sharing your numbers transparently really helped us see that retiring early is possible. And it's also that it's never too late. I think the fact that you started a little bit later than some people do is very, very inspiring. For some of the questions, we will be sending out the recording in a few days. Right after this call, I'll be sending Jackie's links to her social media and also her book and other ways that you can contact her. And if you're okay, maybe we can answer a few more questions before we hop off and just take a few more minutes, but just wanted to share that for those people that I know had to hop off and were kind of private messaging me around that. So we'll stick around. For those that want to stick around for a few more questions, you're free to stay. And thank you everyone for joining. All right.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Appreciate it.
There was a question also around impact investing and how do you select some of the stocks that you invest in for your retirement?
First of all, thank you for asking that question. I think that's hugely important right now. So I was never really into impact investing, but there are actually mutual funds and ETFs, and those are just a basket of stocks where they were created with a certain target in mind. For instance, you might have a mutual fund that is social impact fund that doesn't invest in oil companies or private prisons. Normally there's like a one pager for any mutual fund or any ETF, exchange traded fund, again, a basket of stock, where they will give you a summary of what the goals of that fund is. So it would probably come down to Googling. I would put either mutual fund or ETF and, you know, socially impact investing. Some of them are called ERGs, I think, environment, like there's some focus on environment. Now, the one that I'm really excited about that I just started investing in a few months ago, and I don't know how it's going to do, but there's a new one. It was created last year. I just started investing in it, but it's called the Racial Empowerment, Socially Empowerment Fund. But anyway, it's through the NAACP. So the ticker symbol is NACP. And basically they have partnered with the NAACP to analyze companies that they consider being good stewards around racial injustices and empowerment when it comes to race and diversity. So I'm investing in that, and there are more reasons other than financial that I want to support that fund. So I just got a little bit in there now, but that is becoming all aspects of the socially responsible investing have been really bubbling up, I would say, over the last 3 to 5 years. So they're out there. Most of them are going to be newer because they haven't been around for a very long time.
And just to confirm, it's the NCA ticker?
It's NACP. It's 4 digits. So N like Nancy. It's kind of like NAACP, except there's only one A.
Got it. I'll type it in for everyone, NACP.
Right.
And there was another question around life insurance and retirement. Did you ever consider life insurance as part of this plan?
Okay, so Yeah, so for the life insurance, it depends on what stage you're at. So I always thought that you have life insurance forever, right? It's really supposed to be a temporary vehicle to cover your as income replacement for those that depend on your paycheck. So when my daughter was younger, she did depend on my paycheck, and I needed to have life insurance for that. And really, I only had insurance through my company. So that always covered me. Now, if she was still a minor, let's say she was 12 years old and I retired early, I would still feel that I needed life insurance, because if something happened to me, she relied on my paycheck, and I need to still make sure she's taken care of. Now, that's assuming that I have no assets. Once you build up your assets, you have less and less of a need for insurance, because your assets will now serve as almost being self-insured. So if I pass away now, something happens to me, I've got 1.3 million, a lot of people don't even have that much in life insurance. So she will get way more than she could have ever imagined. So I don't have insurance now because I've built up my assets to a level that, covers anyone that I'm leaving behind. And at this point, no one is relying on my paycheck. I'm not supporting anyone, including my daughter, but obviously, she will get everything. But while you're in accumulation mode and you don't have the assets and someone relies on your income, then you should have insurance to make sure they will be taken care of in the event of your, untimely demise.
Great. Well, I think that those are the majority of the questions. I think that we might have missed a few, but there was a lot of chatter in the chat. So I just want to thank you again, Jackie, for taking the time to share your story and for being so transparent with everyone about it. And I hope you have a great day. And is there anything else that you wanted to share before we hop off?
Only that I went through things on that presentation, but I'll include a link to these. But there was a Market Watch video that was like 7 minutes that kind of shared my story a little bit. But also I did this full presentation. It was a little bit longer than what I did here, but I did it at a conference called Economy, and I ran through all of these numbers as well. And that might be worth just taking a look, because I really, I never call myself inspiring, but I do love to share my story with people that might not have had a straight path like me, and to let them know it's still possible. It's just that your journey is going to look a little different, but that's what makes you unique and beautiful, to have so many different people. So I would love to see this whole FIRE thing be more diverse, and for you guys to have more freedom, and just, to know that it's possible to design the life that you want.
Amazing, amazing. I'll make sure to include those links in my recap email. I'm going to send it out right after we get off the call. And yeah, and for those asking about student debt, definitely check out Snowball Wealth. We have a free product where you can sync your accounts, and we give you more information on COVID and ways that you can save money. And hopefully tackling debt to retire early is a part of your plan too. So thanks again, everyone. And I'll see you all online.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, everyone. This was great.